Mr. Sanyal, Kaala Paani, and this comes up even today in many contexts of the present-day politics that we see. Kaala Paani evokes horror, not just Savarkar, but Barin Ghosh, Ulaskar Dutt, Sachindranath Sanyal, all belonging to the Gadar movement, all spent time in Kaala Paani. What sets Kaala Paani in the Andamans apart from the rest of the Kaala Paani? I mean, and therefore, the importance of Savarkar.
So again, the cellular jail in Port Blair was not just any old jail. It had been deliberately created to essentially break the revolutionaries. So if you hang people, they hang them. But then you take people who you think you can really torture and break them. And so that's what Kaala Paani was. And life there was really, terrible and so bad that many inmates committed suicide and so on. You had Ulaskar Dutt, who was repeatedly electrocuted and lost his mind. It was just a horrible place. I mean, it's like, it's the British equivalent of Auschwitz. What the Nazis did in Auschwitz, this was basically what they were trying to do to us. And so it has a certain evocative image in the minds of those who came from this nationalist armed struggle. And of course, the likes of Savarkar were sent there. And this is not like being sent to the luxury wing of Naini jail. This is a completely different ball game. And the revolutionaries are always trying to liberate this place. Even in the First World War, there was an attempt funded by the Germans to try and liberate it through Thailand, which didn't happen. And of course, in the Second World War, one of the first things that Netaji does after he takes command of the INA is to visit the Andamans, which was then under Japanese control, and he visits the cellular jail. And he renames the two islands, which have been again renamed back to what he had named them, Swatantra and Swaraj. So this was a very important part of the imagery of the armed struggle. It is shocking that the cellular jail, rather than being converted into a national monument, was nearly torn down after independence. At the last minute, it was saved, and one part of it is still around to be a national monument. But I'm glad that there is now a growing interest in this lineage of our freedom struggle.
And how do you see statements that are made and letters by Savarkar that are written with your obedient servant being called out as Savarkar being totally, kowtowing to the British? How do you respond to that?
So, of course, I mean, politically motivated rubbish. No question about it. Everybody wrote your obedient servant in those days. You can read pretty much anybody's letters, and there's a particular courtly language that was expected to be used. By the way, similar kind of language is still retained in our courts today. You have to write a prayer to
His
Lordship. It's not like you're actually worshipping him, but that's the courtly language that is somehow survived there. But of course, 100 years ago, that was the standard way of writing. There is Jawaharlal Nehru writes a similar letter when he was imprisoned briefly in Nabha, for example. I think it was at Nabha. So there are similar things. I mean, Sachindranath Sanyal wrote a similar letter. He was released in 1920. He then went back out. He formed the Hindustan Republican Association, recruited Bismil, Ashfaqullah Khan, Bhagat Singh, Chandrasekhar Azad, and the likes. Now, if he hadn't written that letter, you wouldn't have any of these characters who we all agree were important parts of our freedom struggle. And the Hindustan Republican Army would not have existed. So many of these people were writing these letters routinely. By the way, Sachin Sanyal was then sent back to Kaala Paani in 1926 or 27. He spent another decade and ultimately culminating in the INA. So what I'm trying to say, these people were writing these letters, they were going back to doing things they wanted to do. And as far as Savarkar is concerned, Savarkar was obviously not a trivial person, since he not only spent many years in Kaala Paani, even after he was released, he was kept in virtual house arrest in Ratnagiri. And he was a very important part of the conversation. You see the likes of Bhagat Singh reprinting his books, and so on and so forth. I mean, he was clearly considered an important character even later. Even though he left the revolutionary movement, he was still considered an inspirational character even later on.